Hello, in this broadcast, the evening news from the television company Ostankino. The disaster which occurred on the Kuril Islands today remains the main topic. This is how the South Kurilsk looked prior to the earthquake and tsunami, and here, for example, is what is left of the military hospital. The building, incidentally, was built to sustain an earthquake power of 12, but did not withstand even 9. A similar demise affected other buildings as well. According to the latest information from the District Branch of Emergency Situations, destroyed or heavily damaged by the disaster is more than 90% of the buildings and installations on the South Kurils. On the 7th of October, in the aforementioned facility of emergency situations, they speak of 4 casualties. 7 military personnel with a nurse are presumed to be under the rubble of this building. Their fate is not yet known. However, precisely known is that not a single border troop was affected on the multitude of posts on the South Kurils. Meanwhile, all reserves are being mobilized in order to aid the Kuril citizens. On the 6th of October, 3 planes with emergency rescuers, medical personnel, and necessary equipment were sent out. The rescuers arrived from Krasnoyarsk and Irkutsk, more than 100 people. From the Kharsakovsk port on the evening of the 6th, a towboat set sail with 50 rescuers on board and 2,000 tons of cement, timber materials, and other construction materials and medications. Currently in the port, there's a concentration of 450,000 tons of various cargoes for the victims. Vessels are needed to deliver them. The Central Bank of the Russian Federation announced the accounts of the numbers for deposits of funds to aid the victims. Have a careful look at the screen. Today, Russia expressed gratitude to Japan for its readiness to aid the population of the South Kurils. But there has not yet been a decision on this issue. Meanwhile, in Japan itself, they are dealing with the repercussions of the disaster as well. The epicenter of the earthquake was in the ocean, 20 kilometers from the Japanese island Hokkaido, the coastal strip of which received an extreme dose of the tsunami. Its ricochet crossed overland, even to Tokyo, and across water to the Hawaiian Islands. On Hokkaido, 1 person died and around 200 people were injured. 80 of them are in serious condition. As a result of the earthquake and tsunami on the island, communication lines have been destroyed, also electricity, gas, and water lines. In several spots, the land has cracked open. The railway system on almost all Hokkaido has been interrupted on the north of the island Hansu. Yet the current rage of the disaster in Japan was significantly less than 1 year ago, when only on the island Akusira, more than 200 people died. The modified repercussions of the earthquake significantly is because of the preparedness of the responsible services and the population. Japanese radio and television well in advance informed residents of the islands about the onslaught of the cataclysm, and they also announced the concrete time of the tsunami in various regions. And now about other news of the day, first briefly and then in detail. Alexander Shokhin stated that Russia will be given an extension to pay the debt inherited from the USSR to foreign commercial banks. The government of Russia today declared the preparations for winter unsatisfactory. The Interim Council of Chechnya today announced control over the northern part of the territory of the Republic. The decree of the President, Yeltsin, to extend the state of emergency in Northern Ossetia and Ingushetia today was not ratified. Today, the members of the higher chamber of Russian Parliament again worked behind closed doors. But journalists could only guess, would the Federal Council ratify by midday the decree of the President about extending the state of emergency in the zone of the Ossetian-Ingushetian conflict? Because at this time, the previous decree was to lapse. A slight majority vote turned down the decree. In accordance with the situation, I am supposed to lift the regime of the state of emergency, remove posts and barriers, and there a tragedy could occur. Not having achieved the compromise, the Federative Council for another 2 hours continued to work behind closed doors. As a result, a committee has been formed in order to draft amendments to the presidential decree. The meeting of the Federative Council was interrupted until tomorrow morning. From informed sources, we managed to establish that the state of emergency in the zone of conflict remains in effect. Tomorrow, the 72 hours will expire, which were allotted to the Federative Council in order to examine this decree. Therefore, formally, we still have the right to continue work. The Vice Premier, Sergei Shachra, expressed hope that on Friday the decree of the President will be ratified after all. Answering a question to Interfox, is it possible that by tomorrow the decree will have been supplemented with corrections? He expressed the opinion that this is not realistic. Sergei Shachra also noted that in such questions there should be no political haggling. Here, deep interests of various groups have collided. And now about the situation in Chechnya, which remains volatile. The Interim Council today reported that it is in control of the entire territory of northern Chechnya. At 4 a.m. in Chechnya, the Cherbulensk automobile bridge was blown up over the Terik River. The bridge, according to Intertas, was one of the few routes suitable for use by military technology, and so now isolated from Grozny are Cholkov and Nayur regions. Grozny and the Temporary Council are accusing each other of this action. From Azerbaijan, Interfax reports the rebellion in Ganja was fully suppressed. The president of Azerbaijan, Aliyev, accused certain foreign powers in involvement in the rebellion in the republic. The situation in the republic's second largest city, Ganja, where an attempt was made at a state coup, everything has completely stabilized. Companies are operating, transportation, communications, academic institutions. As a result of the unlawful action in the city, 3 military servicemen died. Speaking last night at the General City Rally, the president of Azerbaijan, Gaydar Aliyev, stated that one of the organizers of the anti-government uprisings in Ganja is a close relative of the Prime Minister, Suryat Huseynov. The head of the cabinet ministers himself, who scheduled a press conference to today, postponed it until tomorrow. 1 hour ago, the session of the National Assembly of the Republic convened. The deputies will discuss the social-political situation in Azerbaijan and also will examine the decree of the head of state about dismissing the Prime Minister, Suryat Huseynov, from his post. Evidently, the political situation in Azerbaijan is far from serene. The leader of the Social Democratic Party of Azerbaijan, and this is incidentally one of the most influential parties there, feels that behind the events of the last days are not outside forces or certain individuals desiring to accomplish a state coup, but the ineffective domestic policy of the president of Azerbaijan. This was a quote. The Economic Chronicle of the day. I'll begin with information about the session of the government of Russia. All journalists present there directed attention to the statement of the Minister of Defense, Pavel Grachov. He said that the armed forces of the country are not ready for winter. As of today, the Ministry of Defense has been financed from the budget only to 38% of its total. This is sufficient for salaries alone. The Ministry of Finances was given 1 day to resolve the problem of the military. Evidently, the session, dedicated to the topic of preparations for winter, was extremely turbulent. Incidentally, what happened and how, from our correspondent who was in the auditorium. In the prepared documents for today's session, the government stated that in the middle of 1994, in the development of the crisis in the Russian economy, qualitatively new trends were noted. Tempos of inflation constantly reduced, reaching the lowest monthly figures, 5 to 6%. The rates on refinancing by the central bank was decreased from 210 to 130%. In the beginning of 1995, tax reform is realistic. Given conducive development of events in 1995, all of this will give an opportunity to overcome the critical decline, the government concludes, and this will generate a conducive investment climate and stimulation of investment activity, without which the stabilization of the economy is unthinkable. All this given conducive development of events, which means a painless winter period as well, which was, as it became clear at today's session, not one ministry is prepared except for the Ministry of Atomic Energy. The reason is still the same: mutual indebtedness, the ridiculous growth of prices for fuel and power sources, and the absence of money locally. The situation is paradoxical. Fuel, oil, and coal is sufficient for winter, but no one can afford it and deliver it to site. As was noted by many ministers, the situation is not yet critical, but close to it. Evidently, that's why the second question about the investment policies was postponed altogether until better times, and all the time was spent on resolving Russia's preparation for winter. As Alexis Kavets joked pessimistically in the middle of the session, winter could come unexpectedly again, and in order to prevent this, at today's session, the government worked out several urgent measures with compulsory realization of them on locations during the next 2 weeks. Despite such a session of government, the Speaker of Parliament categorically refutes predictions about the ostensibly austere winter. Ivan Rybkin feels that movement toward winter is I quote, progressing very effectively, unquote. The fuel, energy, military, industry sectors of the country, not waiting for the realization of decisions of government and not relying on optimistic predictions of speakers, already combined efforts to resolve their own economic problems. The Moscow exhibit of the Tyumensk Display Center summarized the initial results of conversion. The fuel energy sector is dramatically broadening credit lines and investments into defense companies, and this year alone has by 20% reduced purchases of equipment abroad. Now currency will be applied to develop domestic science and technology. The fuel energy minister, Yuri Shafranik, sees the goal thus. Through major projects of the fuel energy sector, first of all, to provide the country with more gas and oil, which is so indispensable today for export and domestic use as well. And secondly, to influence prices via the supplemental resources and begin stabilizing them. And thirdly, to give plants more jobs. I'll quote the Speaker of Parliament, Ivan Rybkin, again. An interview with him today is reported by Interfax. Rybkin feels that the trend toward saturation of the consumer market with foods and industrial goods will be sustained. There is sufficient money for this from those funds which previously were distributed au gratis to developing countries. And again, I quote, "We are moving toward a decrease in the budget of 10 times on aid to former Soviet Union republics with technical no-interest credits." And here's what they say about the state of affairs in our neighboring Belarus today. The appearance of Alexander Lukashenko in the auditorium of the session of the Supreme Soviet of Belarus already precipitates the usual turbulent liveliness among deputies. Today, the subject of emotional dialogue between the president and parliamentarians were his proposals to reform the system of state structure through creating an entire vertical of executive power subordinate to the president. In the opinion of Alexander Lukashenko, it's necessary to divide the executive and legislative powers on locations, with the former drafting local budgets, conducting sessions, and certain representative functions. The main opponents to the president today were the opposition, with affirmations that to revive local rule one can do only by giving it freedom for self-rule and not rigidly centralizing it. Also, the election system of local councils proposed by Lukashenko, in the opinion of the opposition, gives an opportunity for the president and councils to rule, which in the final analysis creates excessiveness of his power. Eventually, the parliament adopted the proposal of President Lukashenko. Today, we also carefully followed the situation in Crimean Parliament, since during the day we received a report about an additional question in the agenda. The question was the appointing of a prime minister for the government of Crimea. As was said in the morning by informed sources, the Speaker of Parliament will propose to appoint Anatoly Franchuk to this post, the current minister in the government of Yevgeny Saburov. He's a Crimean native and also a relative of Leonid Kuchma, since his son is married to the Ukrainian president's daughter. By evening, he was confirmed by 63 votes out of 98. And the president of Ukraine, as already is announced, has prepared his report for parliament. Probably its discussion, in view of the economic situation in Ukraine, will be turbulent. Currently, in the Republic, bread prices are being increased. Prices at which bread is sold in stores today is absolutely out of line with its cost. Government subsidies are increasing and empty out the budget. But now another problem has arisen. Because of the increase of price of bread in Russia, to Russia and neighboring areas, a large quantity of inexpensive Ukrainian bread is being imported. On each loaf, the deliverers have a profit of 15,000 karbovanitsas and transports it wholesale by truckloads. In Ukraine itself also, the bread purchases have increased, but for livestock feed, because combination feeds are much more expensive. And this is when, in certain districts, stored grain is insufficient until the next harvest. The government of Ukraine has decided to establish regulated prices on grain for bread production, which should be included in the cost. But the retail prices will be individual in each district. They must be set by local authorities. From earthly problems to space problems. Last night, the linking of the ship Soyuz TM-20 with the station Mir did not go smoothly. All night our film crew was in flight control. We can't avoid worries. When the significant moment of the linking arrived, the ship, before the eyes of professionals, simply began rocking in proximity to the station. Guests of the flight control center and foreign people could not understand what was happening, but the moment was tense. Beside me was the cosmonaut Makarov. He explained everything working, and yet later began himself to worry. The automatic mode was not working, and at a distance of 150 meters, Alexander Viktorenko himself manually began to guide the ship toward the station. The rocking motion was still felt. Why did the automatic pilot display an emergency indicator on the scene was not clear, and so the cosmonaut decided to link it manually. Everything depended on Viktorenko. The moments went on like hours, and through poor visibility, we on Earth saw that there was a grasp and that the link was completed. And again about politics, the meeting of the president's head of the administration with regional representatives was conducted today basically behind closed doors, but journalists, including ours, managed to obtain information. Today, the authorized representatives of the president from the subjects of the Russian Federation gathered in Moscow for a consultation dedicated to discussing the most vital issues of the political economic life of the country. The session opened under the chairmanship of the head of the administration of the president, Sergei Filatov. In his opinion, it's quite justifiable that the first question in the agenda regards the role of regional sources of mass media in clarifying policies of the president and government. This was precipitated by the fact that the basic center of information for the population is shifting toward regional press. Sergei Filatov also noted the need to discuss the question of interaction between representatives of the president in regions with the central apparatus of the administration. Finally, the third point in the agenda includes an exchange of views on the government of Russia's measures to stabilize the economy. Evidently, this will be the focal point of the second day of the session, when involved in it will be representatives of the government, specifically the first Vice Premier, Oleg Soskovets. Today, Boris Yeltsin had a telephone conversation with John Majors. The President of Russia and the Prime Minister of Great Britain agreed on further coordination of actions, especially in the sphere of disarmament and the matter of regularizing the Bosnian problem. Viktor Chernomyrdin will head the delegation of Russia at the celebrations of the 50th anniversary of Ukraine's deliverance from the German fascist invaders. Festivities begin tomorrow. The Liberal Democratic Party of Russia is seceding from the Agreement on Social Accord. This was announced today live on Buryatsky television by Vladimir Zhirinovsky. An unusual political activity began today in St. Basil's Cathedral on Red Square. The monarchists, together with Gennady Zyuganov, Alexander Rudskoy, and Valery Zorkin. This morning, near St. Basil's Cathedral on Red Square, a prayer service was held by participants of the Pan-Russian Monarchist Convention. The convention itself is underway in the columnar auditorium of the former Noble Council. Representatives of various parties and associations who, just yesterday, one could not even suspect of pro-monarchist tendencies, exchanged first thoughts in corridors and then in auditoriums about the past, present, and future of Russian statehood. The topic of discussion speaks for itself. The idea of monarchy in the life of the church and society, autocracy in Russia, monarchy as a Russian historical ideal, and even monarchy as the guarantor of defense of national entrepreneurship. No matter what associations today's meetings could evoke, no matter what commentary followed, it's a clear example that the period of tense quest for spiritual ideals which followed the collapse of the USSR has not yet ended. Representatives of the most varied movements and schools of thought again offer their own methods to save the homeland. The current Russian democracy allows them freely to propagate their views. However, will this freedom endure if any one of them come to power? The Achievement of Democracy. This is the name of the series provided by the American law enforcement organization Freedom House and the English Fund Support of Democracy. The television broadcast of the series on television channel Ostankino begins Saturday, the 8th of October. The narrator of the serial, Patrick Watson, conducted studies in 30 countries of the world on the significance of democracy, where does it have its roots, how it functions, what its weaknesses are, and perspectives for the future. Today, much is said about the unique development of democracy in Russia, and here's the opinion of Ludmila Thorn, who represents the organization which made the showing of the series on Ostankino possible. Of course, you have a unique form of development, and democracy cannot be rigid. It must be adapted to your desires and norms. And yet, human rights are universal. The traditions of Russia are being revived without political intentions as well. Today in Moscow, the founding assembly of the Russian Maritime Association took place. Such associations existed in port cities of Russia since the 18th century until Soviet rule and were a type of secular clubs for seamen and the security of their social status. Today's Maritime Association will accept in its ranks not only military, but merchant seamen, shipbuilders and students, all those who work or serve on the seas. The Maritime Association intends to provide material and social support for seamen, especially families of casualties. They expect to support the Nakhimовsk Academy. They will open exclusive women's secondary schools for daughters of sea officers, and in general to replicate everything good which the military naval fleet did in the country and resurrect the proud image of the Russian naval officer. This morning in Moscow, after more than a 2-year break, the airplane of the Yugoslavian Air Company from Belgrade landed. On board were famous businessmen, science and cultural figures. This became possible because the UN Security Council lightened sanctions in the area of international air and sea communications. The head of the Trade Industrial Chair of Russia hosted the chairman of the business chambers of Serbia and Chernogorия and Yugoslavia. Today they began to speak about ties between entrepreneurs of Yugoslavia and Russia, including small and average-sized businesses. A rotten apple in exchange for a fruit orchard. This was the biting description made by the German Frankfurt Allgemein of the temporary lifting of sanctions imposed by the UN 28 months ago against the United Republic of Yugoslavia. The rotten apple, in the opinion of the newspaper, this is the refusal of Belgrade to continue the war of occupation, and the fruit orchard is the 100 coming days permitted by the UN for international air and sea communications, the participation of Serbia and Chernogorия in sports and cultural events. This is under the conditions that Belgrade complies with the multilateral embargo against Bosnian Serbs. We'll say directly the orchard is not very abundant, but no matter what, with the arrival of the Russian airliner Il-62 to the Yugoslavian capital, the Belgrade airport Surcin again is open for international flights. As was noted by the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Vitaly Churkin, who arrived there, the political blockade was penetrated, which has become possible because of the course of the leadership of Serbia and Chernogorия to establish a lasting peace in former Yugoslavia. Unfortunately, one cannot say this about the Bosnian Serbs, who continue to have a negative attitude to the peace plan of the International Contact Group, and this is what inhibits, for now, raising the question of lifting all sanctions against the former republics of Yugoslavia. The armed resistance in Bosnia and Herzegovina continues. As previously, the Sarajevo airport, Butmir, has been blockaded, through which residents of Sarajevo and deployed UN peacekeeping personnel are provided with cargoes, and humanitarian convoys of the Blue Berets stand still more than transporting cargo to the population exhausted from war. In Belgrade, meanwhile, the partial lifting of the sanctions is greeted with optimism but without euphoria. The critical point has been overcome, and in the opinion of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the United Republic of Yugoslavia, Vladislav Jonovic, the significant psychological and political breakthrough has come in the process of regularizing the Bosnian crisis. In India, according to official statistics, as of the 5th of October, overall in the country suspected of being infected with plague and hospitalized were 5,172 people. Among 167, the diagnosis was confirmed. 53 have died. The predictions of further spread of the epidemic are quite contradictory. According to the assessments of specialists, the situation which happened in India after the outburst of plague in Surat stabilized. The measures of prevention and treatment were so effective that this circumstance, and also the fact that the illness was quickly localized, evoked even doubts. Is it plague at all? However, doctors directly involved in this field refute such affirmations, directing attention to the fact that in all cases antibodies were found which are developed by the body only upon infection with the plague. Specialists exhort the public to not regress into premature euphoria. Eventually, the illness has to be overcome, but it has not been done yet. Certain physicians compare the situation with a bomb which was located on time and marked by flags to define what type of detonator it is, but not disarm it yet. Today from Moscow to Delhi, on a special Aeroflot flight, an airplane will deliver Russian specialists, and their task is to prevent infection among the almost 2,000 Russian citizens working in India, to prevent the infectious spread into Russia as well. By return flight to Moscow, the replacement air crews will return, and those who were in India on business trips. It's understandable their striving is to return home as quickly as possible to relatives and friends, where a 6-day quarantine awaits them. Returning to the Madrid meeting of the so-called London Club of Bankers, Alexander Shokhin, in connection with this, stated that the position of Russia and the international commercial banks on the question of paying debts have come closer. Moscow is very close to concluding a compromise agreement on deferring debt payments. However, the chairman of the leading German bank, Deutsche Bank, Helmut Koper, stated that before reaching the agreement, perhaps weeks or even months could pass because Russia owes money to more than 600 commercial banks. The overall debt of Russia to these banks is $24 billion. And now about the agreement with Finland. This is unprecedented. In Helsinki, an agreement was signed between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland and the government of Karelia. In diplomatic language, this is called only a protocol, but in realistic terms, Karelia is part of Russia. For the first time, it performs as a full-fledged subject of international law. The significance of this document, in my view, is that, in practice, being realized are those rights which the subjects, districts, rims, and republics of the Federation have according to the Constitution of the Russian Federation and the Federal Agreement. According to the protocol, the 1,000-kilometer border of Karelia and Finland becomes even more transparent. New roads will appear and formalities are alleviated. The coordination of the northern protection of nature will become closer, trade will increase, and joint economic projects. Karelia and Finland, if more broadly, Russia and unified Europe, because evidently from the beginning of the new year, the Finns will enter the European Council. Good evening. The World Volleyball Championships in Athens are on their way to the finish. Today, the quarter-final matches were held. The first semi-finalists were determined after the match between the United States and South Korea. The Americans won in 3 sets, and later on the court appeared the volleyball teams of Italy and Russia. In the current season, the team of Viktor Radin 3 times beat the world champions, but today one couldn't recognize our volleyball players. Russia lost in 4 sets. Disappointing is not only the defeat, but the ease with which the Italians won 3 sets, 15-4, 15-3, 15-5. Now, in the best scenario, the Russian team can count only on 5th place. News from the auto racing world. The Englishman Nigel Mansell, the ex-world champion in Formula One, will participate in the remaining 3 Grand Prix of this season. This was stated today by the owner of the team, Williams-Renault. The qualifying round began for competitions in the Camel Trophy. Of 5,000 Russian contenders, organizers of the marathon selected 32 candidates. In the suburban Moscow Dimitrova, in conditions as close as possible to combat, they rivaled for the right to become members of our team for the first time, for the chance to be in the world of exotic and adventurous trials. Women competed. 8 people passed into the next selection. The Camel Trophy will traverse in May along the roads, rather lack of roads, of the 5 countries in Central America, and will finish in Mexico.